what really, really matters to us. And so I think this is also the spirit of this event and why we put it out here, right, Jude? That we thought this year has been utterly money madness. There's been so much movement, so much uncertainty, so many things that have happened. And we thought the best way for us to gain an understanding and also gain a little bit of control back, maybe, is to hear from each other, to share together, and to learn from some stellar experts. And so I'm absolutely delighted that all of you are here today to listen and watch. And with that, I'm going to be back at 11 at the panel, and Jude, I shall leave you to it.
Okay, that's great. I should say that Olga's background is in money, in finance. She spent her whole life as a financial expert setting up programs within banks, particularly for women. My background's nothing to do with finance. My background is theatre, film. I'm an arts producer, and I'm very typical of a girl brought up in a northern town, Liverpool, from a very modest background where I wasn't really encouraged to talk about money. And I never thought that money was something that belonged to me, but I was glad that I had some when I finally started, getting a salary. So we're going to start off this morning talking to 3 women from the entertainment industry, an industry that's got lots and lots of uncertainties built into it. And we're going to find out from them what their attitudes are to money and how that attitude has been sort of shaped by their backgrounds, their families, and contemporary attitudes to women. So I'm going to welcome them in now. We've got Shobhana Gulati, we've got Charlotte Church, and Alison Steadman. And let's just see this technology. Oh my God, it's actually working. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hello. Hooray, hooray. And listen, folks, I can't tell you how pleased we need to be that Alison, Shobhana, and Charlotte are here on a Saturday morning, partly because I know that Shobhana, you've been filming all week and you probably wanted just to stay in bed with some toast. Charlotte will come back to because she's running a school amongst many other things that she's doing. And then Alison is never off the screens. So at the moment, Alison, I've just seen your program Life.
Oh, Life, yes.
Absolutely amazing.
Oh, great.
And, and you deserve some downtime. So we're grateful that you've come to talk to the hundreds of women out there about attitudes to money. Now, we had a conversation with the writer and comedian Kathy Lett recently, and I said we did a kind of a money chat, a bit like this. And she said, "Oh, I know nothing about money." She made this gesture. "I know nothing about money. I don't really talk about money."
Oh, God, sorry.
This gesture is what we find loads of women kind of go, it's almost like they're saying, money is not something I want to discuss. So I don't really like to deal with it very much. And then you say, "Well, do you have a job?" And they say, "Oh, well, yes, I have got a job." And you say, "Do you get a pay slip?" They say, "Yes, I do." "Do you have a bank account?" "Yes, I do." But nevertheless, the general kind of anxiety is still there. And I'm really interested to know where it comes from and what do we do about it? Because it does definitely stop us taking our place in the world of finance and, A, getting equal pay, B, then using our money positively to change in the way that money gets used. And then we pass on that anxiety to our kids or our nieces or our or our godchildren or whatever. So, I mean, let's begin, Alison, with you. What would you say has coloured your idea about money? What's been the most influential way that money has been taught to you as your background?
Well, probably started with my mum. My mother was a housewife. She brought up 3 daughters. We didn't have a lot of money. My dad worked in an office. He got regular pay, but not a lot. And she had to really manage very, very carefully to make sure that we were all fed and that the rent was paid and that the bills were paid. And she did it extremely well. And she sort of drummed it into me that money was very important and I must always take care of it and not be silly, not be flippant. And as the years have gone on, I've realized how wise she was, because as an actor, we suddenly can get a job and you think, oh, wow, I'm going to earn all this money. Brilliant, you know. And then you get all this money and you think, oh, I'm going to buy myself this, buy myself that. And I've known this happen with a lot of actors. And then suddenly they get the tax bill for that. And they've spent all the money and they can't pay it. And then they're in a mad panic. And then they're thinking, well, I've got to try and borrow some money to pay my tax bill and all this. Because as actors, we're in the money, out of the money all the time. And so I have been pretty cautious all my life with money. I'm not someone who'll suddenly say, I'm going to buy myself a big flash car, you know, or something. I really kind of make sure that I've got money in the bank to cover everything.
So I presume you're really grateful that your mum made that kind of idea of, well, save it up, spend it when you've got it, keep saving and spending. And that was her, her style. And
I know attitudes now are so different because everyone can get overdrafts, they can borrow, they can do this. But I was brought up in a time when you couldn't do that. If you didn't have any money, forget it. That was it. You didn't have any. Life is very different now. I appreciate that. But I think still, you've got to still adhere to the fact that, you know, you mustn't be silly with money, because if you haven't got any, you haven't got a dinner on the table, and that's all there is to it. So,
and in your household, did your, because actually it sounds very like mine. Like my mum stayed at home, and she had 4 daughters, and my dad went to the office, and I always had the impression that my dad's responsibility was doing things like buying the car and sorting out a mortgage when they finally got one, and as sort of like he was responsible for these like big things, big decisions, and mum did the weekly housekeeping and the Christmas presents. I think dad gave the pocket money, you know, but I certainly had a kind of division between what women did with money and what men did with money. Was that like?
Absolutely. Yeah, because my mum didn't work. She looked after the household and the family. That's how it was then. This is in the 40s, you know, when I was born, into the 50s. You know, women didn't earn money. They shared the money with their husbands, or were given an allowance, or whatever you want to call it. But it was life was very different.
Yeah, I think that attitude, though, of men's identity being partly buoyed up or defined by, you know, being the breadwinner and being the decider, the kind of financial decider, is still very much running through many societies, ours included. And I think that the idea of women, if you like, being given an allowance, even if they give it to themselves, but you know, spending within an allowance, it is still very much part of how we operate mentally, you know, even if we could do something differently than that. Can we talk a little bit about how, I mean, some of the women you've played, obviously, you know, you've done millions of things over your career. You and I worked together. I directed a play that you were in called When We Are Married, where you played a character who, it was incredibly important that you didn't lose face over money or, you know, respectability and money was like a really strong thing. And a lot of the women in that play like put pressure on themselves to maintain an appearance that they were doing well, even when behind the scenes they were actually quite terrified about how things were going. Yeah, that idea of fronting up. Do you think that we're still doing that? Do you think there's a lot of shame about keeping up appearances?
I think, less so now. I think keeping up appearances, that is a bit old school, I think. I think people are much more willing to, you know, say, this is my life, this is what I'm doing, you know, not, you know, putting the best frock on and the lipstick and inviting people for tea and all that sort of thing to show off their homes. I think it has changed, thank goodness, quite a lot. Yeah.
So you think people talk about money more easily now?
Well, I wouldn't say totally easily, but yeah, I mean, I think most people are still reluctant to actually say, actually, I'm really in debt. I've got an overdraft of 50,000 quid and I don't know what the hell to do. I think we are all still coping and trying to deal with it privately, because your money is your private business. And you feel perhaps guilty that you let yourself get into that situation, or indeed that the world has dished you a bad deal. You know, you've lost your job, or you can't work. I mean, particularly now with the whole COVID thing, there must be so many people without money and in debt because they can't work, you know. So it's incredibly difficult. But I think we are still reluctant to share that with other people.
Yes. I think there's a lot of shame, a huge amount of shame. And for women as well, when if you like, we have the responsibility, even though most people are working and most people have to work, it isn't just a fact of, you know, we want to, we have to.
Yeah.
But I think that the responsibility for looking after the well-being of the family still feels very much like it lands back on the woman. And
yeah.
So, you know, I hear a lot of women talking about the shame of food banks. I don't hear, they're the ones doing the food banks more than the men.
Yeah.
And so I think that like being able to look after your family for both men and women is huge. But I think for women at the moment, it's very, very, very tough.
Yeah.
Alison, if you had, I mean, I'm not going to sort of ask you about your personal wealth.
Good.
But I want to ask, based on this idea of being cautious, because there's an idea that, you know, women are careful with money and that's a good thing, but that it's also a bad thing, because it means that women sometimes don't take advantage of, you know, they have enough money, perhaps they could invest it and earn more money. They have enough money, therefore they could maybe get a second mortgage and get a buy-to-let house and, you know, create another income. I mean, in other words, they don't use money to make more money. And have you ever examined that yourself? Has your team or your accountant or ever said to you, why don't you splash out or use your money differently?
No, not really. I am still very cautious with my money. I mean, you know, I have discussions with the bank occasionally, you know, and I kind of think, oh, I'll buy some premium bonds, you know, whatever. But I'm not someone who will launch out and say, oh, I'll remortgage my flat to buy another property, then I can let that out and I can earn some money. I'm just not that kind of person. And I know people do that, but that's just not in me. I just like to be able to look at my bank account and say, all right, I've got enough to pay that bill. I can pay my tax bill. I can perhaps have a holiday or whatever, and I can pay for it. I've never been someone who will, you know, be adventurous with money at all. Yeah.
And when you see all the kind of financial jargon, because one of the things that SmartPurse is trying to do is say, look, can we just stop all this jargon, just explain clearly what somebody is trying to tell you about pensions?
Yes.
Cards. Does it make you go kind of, or are you good at looking at things that are written about money?
No, I'm not good at all. I mean, I have an accountant, and thank goodness he's the loveliest man. He's been my accountant for 45 years or something. And he will just say to me, because you realize this, or, you know, make sure that, and he advised me years ago to get a pension, which I did. I think if he hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't have thought of it. You know, so I'm someone who, I suppose because of my background, is very much, I earn the money, I put it in the bank, and then I, you know, pay the whatever I've got, bills I've got, and buy food and have a little holiday. But that's, you know, so I do rely on the bank or my accountant to give me advice if I need it.
But the good thing is you've known him. It's a him, is it? Yeah, you've known him for years. And
him, yes, and he's wonderful, and he's my guy that he advises me in a very calm way, you know, very sensibly, and I trust him. And I think to have somebody that you can trust and talk about money with is very important. So you don't want someone who's saying, hey, why don't you do this? If you don't want to do that, I think we've got to be master of our purse, I think.
So look, some key things for people listening in here. Pension, we're going to come back to that later. Like, if you hadn't been told to get a pension, would you have got one? I think lots of people didn't and don't. Also, there's lots of issues around pensions for women. Once you go part-time, and many women do go part-time or are forced to go part-time, your pension drops considerably. And some people are way underneath the auto-enrollment of pension. So it doesn't happen automatically necessarily. So there's lots of things, but we'll pick that up later. And the other thing is whoever the somebody is, that you can talk about money to, even if it's like just one person that you can have honest conversations with. Some people, lots of people won't have an accountant, they won't have a financial advisor, but you need one person, I think, to talk about money to. And that's not always your partner. I mean, it isn't always your partner, is it? Because your partner, there can be lots of tensions about who's doing better than who, or, attitudes to money in a partnership. So you can't always say that I talk about everything with my husband or my partner.
Yeah.
Always works.
Well, it's good to have someone like my accountant I can talk to, who he doesn't have any, he's unbiased. He just wants to make sure that I'm okay. And so therefore that's good to have that person in my life, Yeah.
So I mean, again, people listening, most people probably aren't in the entertainment industry. In the entertainment industry, there is a norm, which is that you're paid by contract, bit by bit. As Alison says, you may have a contract for 6 months, you may not work again for another 6 months. So it's very unpredictable, massively unpredictable. And of course, at the moment, and I'm coming to you, Shobna, to find out what's going on for you, because when I heard you were filming, I thought, well, great, because a lot of, it's very hard at the moment. There's no live theatre, so loads of actors and performers just haven't got any work at all. Lighting technicians, etc., no work. But the standard idea for an actor or a performer is make money when you can, and then look after yourself in between time. And for that reason, loads and loads of parents never want their children to go into show business, because they say, well, it's not reliable. And I was wondering, Shobna, how you got into the arts and what your family thought about it financially.
They were really worried when I wanted to choose art as my becoming an artist as my career. I think I started to dance early on, and I wanted to be a classical Indian dancer. And it brought the family in from all over the world to tell me that probably wasn't going to be the right thing for me. Yeah, I mean, obviously the stereotypes surrounding, that choice. I was educated. I came from a middle-class background. My father and mother came to England in the 60s. My dad came with £5 in his pocket. It's a story that a lot of my kind of people have. My mum was a housewife. He gave mum money to raise us all and to feed us all, and she was very frugal. I think it was expected after the education that I had received that I would be a doctor, a lawyer, dentist, or an engineer. It didn't happen. And I think to an extent it was their fault, because I was a very shy person and they wanted me to, try and find a voice. So I was lucky enough to have dance lessons. So, when it became more than my hobby, it became problematic.
I did the same thing. I was sent to ballet when I was 5, not because my parents were into the arts, because I had flat feet. The doctor said you should tell her to point her toes, and that might help. And the rest is history. So again, my family were like, "What? I want to go into the theatre." They were like, "What?" But all right.
I'm also a girl, and that was something else to consider. And I came as the third child. The third girl in a family of 4. So as it was, I struggled to find my voice. So then struggling to find your voice as the third girl and followed by a boy. And then also struggling to find a husband. and then also struggling to find a regular career. So, you know, I had a lot of odds stacked against me. But I was determined to make art my life. I mean, I love dance, and after I left university, I went to dance school. I was lucky enough in those days, we got grants, so I was lucky enough to extend my grant and do a postgraduate in dance. I didn't have anything. I mean, I suppose I had all that education. So in terms of finding a regular kind of job after that, after I qualified in dance, it was quite hard. But I had the ability to use my other skills, and I became a teacher of dance and a choreographer. As you know, I choreographed one of your shows.
You did.
And in learning to be a dancer, we also had this little course about learning to manage ourselves and to understand what it was to become freelance. And that was really important as part of my my education. So I really learned at an early start that, you know, my money wouldn't be regular and I would have to go from job to job. And I worked to eat, and that's how it was. And then I became pregnant as a single mum, and that was hard too, to try and then manage another person, manage my job, and manage my family, and manage the expectations around that.
That's a very tough call that other people listening to this will identify with, because there's maybe a bit less now, but I think still, and in loads and loads of parts around the world, being a single mum puts you in a situation where you have to like defend so much of the space around you. You know, you have to kind of stand up for yourself and your child, and resist people caricaturing you. And so in that respect, you're trying to also present the right situation all the time. It's a huge strain.
It was a huge strain. It made me question what I did for a living. And I did just before I got my job on Dinner Ladies. And my son was about 3 by then, and I'd been working freelance and taking him with me to classes and teaching. Just before I got Dinner Ladies, I applied to be a regular teacher. I was going to teach modern languages, because I believed at that point you could get extra, and I had studied languages at school, at university. So I thought, well, I would be a modern language teacher, and that would solve everything. That would solve the caricatures, that would solve the stereotypes, that would solve my money. That would, you know, I ended up in social housing because prior to that, I was living in my car. I was completely homeless. I was married. I left that. We had a joint account. It was emptied, and I was homeless.
Okay, so it's worth at this point just telling people listening that we've partnered with Safe Lives and the charity Safe Lives and the organisation Surviving Economic Abuse, and we're giving free places on all our Smart Purse courses to survivors. And every time you sign up to join Smart Purse, we're giving a parallel offer free, because this issue of economic abuse and domestic abuse, and there's all kind of definitions of this, but, you know, when you are in your car and your bank account's been emptied, presumably by your ex-husband.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I'd just say that we had nothing by then.
Yeah.
It was the 90s. There was a great recession. We'd lived abroad. I left him, and there was nothing left. I did have a credit card in my name then.
Right.
Just one.
Yeah.
I had a joint one that was completely stopped, and then I had one in my name. So from then on in, I had the ability to try and work out my life with my credit card.
Yeah, so talk about that, because you and I said the other day that you really believe in credit cards once you know how to manage them.
Yeah, I think so. And I think what I knew was that is if I didn't have the ability to pay for it when I needed to pay for it, when the bill came, then that would be a problem. So I knew that already from, like Alison, you know, we were brought up to not, you know, to not overspend if you couldn't afford it. So I just knew that. But then I also knew the benefit system would help me too. And I knew that there was a whole shame surrounding the benefit system. And because I was a middle class girl, and because my marriage had failed, and because I'd become a single parent, he wasn't the father of the baby. And I have to say here that he wasn't abusive in any way, shape or form. It was just that we were both young and we didn't really know what was going on in our lives when we split up. But it so happened that there was no money between us, either of us. But obviously a man has a different journey from a woman. And so I can't remember what I was saying, but
credit cards.
So credit cards, benefits. I took advice. I mean, I literally went to Citizens Advice when I arrived in England and found the things that were appropriate for me. I had to overcome the shame of benefit. I had to overcome the shame of what that brought to me from my family. But then I realized that at that point you could get family credit, which would help you work as well as raise your family. So I took it all on board, and I tried my best, and I took advice as much as I could. And at that point, I met a financial advisor, because I didn't want my child to be without support should I not survive this that I was in. So I took advice, and I decided that I would have life insurance, and that I would consider what a pension meant. And at that time, for artists, accessing a pension was very difficult. Until I became a member of Equity, and then later on, I was able to, get an employer pension. Yeah, I mean, it has been a very, very tough journey. But then I was lucky in the jobs I got, and I got some really long jobs where I was paid regularly. Mm-hmm. And that really helped me, not simply in terms of my financial situation, but with my family as well. You know, suddenly I got a job that paid me money, and therefore I was all right. I wasn't a liability anymore, you know, to them or anybody.
Yeah, I know. I mean, this is such a wonderfully complex and difficult territory, isn't it? That we are legitimized by money.
We're legitimized by money, we're legitimized by husbands, we're legitimized by our jobs. You know, we can't just be women in the world doing things. Mm-hmm. We have to have all of those things attached. I do remember now, later in my life, I'm 54, I was born in 1966. My last boyfriend said to me, "Oh my goodness, I thought you were shit at money, sorry for swearing. You have a pension." And I said, "Why wouldn't I?" You know, the shock was there that even the stereotype of an actor or a person who works in the arts without any solid foundation, and whether that's just a woman in the arts or whether that's a woman in general, I'm still trying to figure that out.
I think it's really interesting. I mean, people will obviously know Shobana from Dinner Ladies, from Coronation Street, and you probably don't know that history of her. And why would you? Because we mostly in society, we try to kind of go look at the shiny front. We don't kind of go look at the more complicated past. And I really want us to feel as women that we don't reinforce the idea of shame. That we look after each other and say life is very bumpy. And in a way, you could say that if it's not bumpy, then you're probably not, that we're very, very lucky if it's not bumpy ever. But these bumps give us more understanding and more empathy about everybody else's lives. I mean, you won't look at a homeless woman in the same way as somebody who's never experienced that will. Obviously, you'll have a completely different understanding of the path that can lead there, but also the path that can lead away from it. So, but what I want to come on to, because I'm going to talk to Charlotte next, is what I want to observe for people is that you did at a certain point go, I am going to face the reality of my money issues for my child and for myself. I don't know how I'm going to solve it, but I am going to look at it properly and then do something. So you weren't passive. You kind of went, I have no clear way out, but I'm going to look at it. And I think I urge people in that situation, but also in all our situations.
You're never too young and you're never too old to take advice. And the thing is the advice you take is you need to find the right advice. And it doesn't usually, for me, it's not just come from one person. I do have a team of people now, but I've gone to seek them out. And one of my team is a woman, and she's great. And she understands my risk aversion. But what I wanted to say is that what's really important and what has been so solidifying for me is looking at pension, looking at my future, trying to find out what that means to me, and to have the control over that, and to not just simply invest money, but to think about where your money's going and what funds it's going into. And I think that, you know, if you have an open discussion, you can pick those funds yourself. You can be ethical. You can manage your assets, and you can manage your tax. But you need to find somebody who can talk to you in a very simple way. I'm not, I have to say, I just about passed my maths O level. I'm a practical person. I make sure that I write down my expenditure and I write down my income, and I just write it down, and I look at it, and because I have to manage it, because there's nobody else but me, and I don't have a conversation with a partner because I don't usually have one, and that's the way it is. You know, I've just got to do it myself, and I've got to rely on that. And then one thing that you said, Jude, was it's a very, very very fearful time. But then I don't know, there is a famous quote by Warren Buffett. I know he's a bloke, and I know he might be dodgy, but I don't know whether he is or he isn't. But I wanted to say was, he said, invest when everybody else is fearful. He's more fearful when people are investing. Now, I just thought that was a really interesting thing to say. And the thing is, as women, we need to overcome a whole heap of things. And one of the biggest things we have to overcome is this fear that we can't do it, but we can do it. And I'm not living in my car anymore. Yeah.
So that's like, I think there is a fear from women about money, and you're right. We can do it, and we must do it. Charlotte, I'm going to come to you. And when I said, Charlotte's up on a Saturday morning, she's running. You started an enterprise recently. You started your own school, an independent school, because you wanted children to have a different imaginative curriculum and a different approach to education. And I imagine that to do all of that, I mean, we've talked about it a little bit, you and I, but to do all that, you had to really get your head around money, grants, investment, property. I don't know. I'm just, surmising here. Yeah. And I'm sure everybody knows that Charlotte started off as a child singer, was very famous at a very early age. And I'm assuming that your money was put for you by your family in trusts or whatever. But anyway, you wouldn't have been looking after your own money early, and eventually you had to. So can you tell us a little bit about your relationship to money, bearing in mind that you've had an unusual history? Well, everybody's history is a bit unusual.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in not a poor household, but like properly working class. And my mum was really, really tight with money. Really, she used to give my dad like 50p a day for lunch. So we'd have to get like a 30p Panda Pop and a packet of crisps, and she would not give him any more. So she was always really, really fiscally conservative, but all really tight with money. And so that's the sort of environment I grew up in. And then, of course, when I got famous, then money just started flowing in. Like I earned a lot of of money in a short period of time. My mum and dad put my money in a trust for me, which was, sort of all set up legally, and I couldn't have control of it until I was 18. And so my relationship with money has always been one of, I feel very grateful and incredibly lucky, because it just isn't my it isn't the history of my family at all. But also I spent the majority of my life really not having any connection with it at all. It was just this thing over there, which enabled my lifestyle, and I just didn't have any sort of connection with it. And it's only very recently, like literally in the last couple of weeks, that I've taken all of my money out of stocks and shares, because I just started to think this is so out of line with all of my values. So over the last 6 or 7 years, I've been making my investments more ethical and more in line, just starting to sort of see, oh, hang on, I don't believe in this. This isn't how I want to manage things. But it's been quite a slow process. And then recently, I've just completely taken my money out of stocks and shares, and I just thought, this is just, I don't believe in this system. So why am I involved in it? Why am I propping it up? And my plan is now that I want to buy parcels of land and set up eco glamping businesses, things which are much more in line with my values, and creating beautiful spaces for people to be, and maybe curating some art in those spaces, and curating educational opportunities for children, and that sort of stuff. But it's been a really long journey of me sort of taking control, and I suppose feeling worthy of it, because for a very long time it was just this thing over there which was amazing, and it made my life very fluid, and the way I see money now, because also I've been on a quite an intense spiritual journey throughout my life as well, and I'm really very interested in the philosophical spiritual areas of life and existence, and how we should be living, and what this journey means, and so I see money as another form of energy, and I suppose that what I really want to concentrate on with the money that I have is not letting it build up and stagnate, which I don't believe in. I don't think that's good for the world. I think the accumulation of money, especially when it's far too much, as we know in the world right now, there's huge inequality, wealth inequality, which is a massive problem. But if you think about money as a sort of energy source, or energy flowing around the world, that accumulation just makes it stagnant, and it should be constantly flowing. And so I think that's what I want to do with my own money now, is just sort of make sure far more of it is just out in the world, doing its thing. But with the school, or with the Awen project, I think the most radical thing about what I'm proposing with the Awen project is that you're building these sort of progressive, democratic, co-created educational facilities and educational communities, but they are self-financing. So for the first maybe 7 to 10 years, you will need some philanthropy, you will need some grant funding. But the idea is that over that time, the kids and the surrounding community build their own businesses, that you can have after school clubs, you can monetize after school clubs and holiday clubs, which are in the same, have the same vision and principles as the democratic creative education. And that eventually these little communities become a closed circuit. They become self-financing, so that you don't necessarily have to rely on the whims of government and how things can suddenly be underfunded and this sort of stuff. so yeah, this journey that I'm taking with the Awen project has been a huge learning tool for me, and has probably been a huge part of me taking control of my own finances.
Okay, and so you again, these are all brilliant, interesting stories. I mean, I wanted you all to be together because it is interesting hearing each other, isn't it? The kind of the journey that everybody's on.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Really fascinating. So again, listeners, I mean, you can imagine like 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old girl, money coming in, and somebody, presumably a financial advisor to the family, saying, well, look, we'll put it in these stocks and shares, we'll invest it for her, and then she can have it when she's older. And as you say, that leaves you with a comfortable knowledge that you've got money, you're not going to be broke, but also like no relationship to it and no power over it and no involvement in it. And then you've gone from that, which is actually often the case for people who like get rich, as it were. They're often like kept away from their money, which is why you hear so many stories of people being fleeced by their managers or whatever. But I'm not suggesting, by the way, that most managers do that, but there are just, you get some horror stories. But then what you're really saying is that there comes a point when you, for other reasons than just yourself, you want agency, you want to make change happen in the world, you want things to be different. You've got different political views, you care about the kind of the green environment. I know how passionate you are about that, and you're passionate about education. And so you suddenly go, well, how do all these systems relate to each other? And so that idea of passive money is really an important concept for people to think about. Like, if you've got tiny amounts of money, but you kind of refuse to think about it, that is also a kind of passivity. You need to make money, as you say, have its energy. It's not a terrifying thing. We're taught it is frightening, I think, as children and as women particularly. But it's only as frightening or as positive as our ability to control it, actually. And so now what you're saying, with the idea of, using the word like monetizing, we're going to monetize, we're going to be entrepreneurial, we're going to invest, all of these kind of concepts of manipulating financial possibility in an imaginative way for the betterment of the community. Is that giving you happiness around money? Does money now become an exciting, positive ingredient? I think that's what you're saying, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think that money has absolutely been something that, and it's a bit like the way I felt about politics before I became just much more involved, much more aware. I educated myself, and then I tried to help out and become an advocate and just be a part of the world, really. And it's the same thing with money. It almost felt like, oh, that's not my domain. Like, that's got nothing to do with me. Whatever.
Yes, that gesture. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that once we sort of step into once you sort of eradicate the fear, you sort of blow away the mists and the mysticism that surrounds it, that it is, this incredibly complex and, I was terrible at maths at school or whatever it might be, and just sort of see it as this flowing energy source that you can manipulate and work with, and absolutely that makes you can make your life more fluid, and can absolutely aid you and your happiness and your ability to choose and stuff. But also when you start to see it as something that isn't there to be accumulated, it isn't about buying more stuff. It's hopefully about, I mean, at least for me, it means that I now can I have more power to be able to try and be a good force in the world. And if I didn't, like, for example, with the Awen project, I put £150,000 of my own money in to start it off. If I didn't have the money that I do, then I wouldn't have been able to do that. And so what I'm really interested in, And part of the remit of the Awen project is to help seed fund and support other communities to set up their own education facilities. And so demystifying money, demystifying the process of how you get more of grant funding, of setting up businesses, of being entrepreneurial, teaching that as a skill, not just to the children in the community, but also the parents and the grandparents, is a huge part of the education and of what we're trying to do. So I think we'd love to work more with Smart Purse.
Right. So listen, everybody, here's an example. All three women, and well, four, because I include myself, totally modest backgrounds, no background in money, no knowledge of money, no sense that like almost that we were worth a lot of money, just grateful that we had any. Yeah. And then, you know, gradually changing that attitude to, because, you know, we can change it and we are worth something. And also you can make a difference. Just for yourself, you can make a difference and you are worth something. You know, it doesn't always have to be about other people. It can be because you are worth something. Charlotte, we've got a lot of questions coming in, and I'm going to start the first one with you. This is from Carla Mackenzie Johnson. Do you think it's the responsibility of parents, or do you think it's the responsibility of schools to teach about finance in life?
Absolutely. I think it's the responsibility. I mean, you will... You know, there's a lot of patterning going on in this world, and with, you know, parents and with education and the way in which we teach our children. Children just tend to, you know, take on a lot of their parents' attributes and you know, a lot of their attitudes towards money and things like this. And so I do think that it's important for us to identify what the important financial lessons are, and be teaching money in a much more practical way to children. But also, you know, what we're finding is that in terms of education, you're only going halfway if you're trying to educate the child. You know, it needs to be, you know, quite an open educational therapeutic approach to whole families and whole communities. Like, it's not enough just to say, I'm gonna take this child out of context and out of their environment and fill them with all this information, and then, you know, not think about the fact that, of course, they are, you know, they've been grown to their container, which is their family.
Yes, their family and their culture. We've got a question, Shobhan, directly for you from Lisa Lee, who says that traditional families, particularly traditional families who carry cultures where the patriarchy, I'll come back to that word in a minute, but, you know, the idea of the man needing to be in charge is quite reinforced over and over again. How can we get away from those belief systems, which Lisa says are detrimental to mental and financial well-being for women?
I think it's really hard to get away from them, but I think in terms of finding your voice, and speaking about it and continuing the conversation around it, and finding, you know, the women within those traditional structures to try and find a way through it, and getting your allies. I think those things are really important within your community, and taking control, and perhaps even just trying your hardest to try and understand it yourself instead of trying to define yourself through it. You know, take responsibility for it by yourself and try and, you know, battle your way through. I mean, and it's not easy, but I think, you know, find your ally.
Find your ally is a very important thing. I mean, you've all talked about getting advice, finding people you trust to talk to. And one of the things, by the way, that Smart Purse is trying to do is encourage more women to become financial advisors, because there are very few women who are financial advisors. And so you perpetuate an idea that the person who will be the expert is a man. And there are wonderful men. You know, I love men. I've got one. I've got several. I've got a partner and a son and a grandson. So it's nothing against men, but this reinforcement all the time that if you need to know about money, you need to go and find a man to help you. That's not, in the long run, going to be good for us. We need to get girls in schools to think that financial literacy is part of their thing. And we need to get girls in schools to stop thinking that like these hard conversations and sort of tech, science, finance is like blokey. And I think part of the problem often is that is girls' femininity doesn't look like that. Charlotte, you were going to say.
Can I say as well that I think that a really something that's just come to me that I think is really quite deep rooted actually is this idea that money is dirty. You know, that actually money is like this negative thing, and it's sort of corrupt, and you know, there's this, you know, for a lot of people, you know, there's a lot of, it's almost seen as like a dirty word, you know, a terrible force. And I think in part that probably adds to our fear about it. And so I think just, you know, again, seeing it as, you know, not this, you know, that it's quite neutral. Actually, it isn't either good or bad. It is this sort of neutral thing that is to be molded and manipulated. And yeah, sorry.
I think that's spot on. I mean, partly because images of rich people are all, you know, they're rich and they're corrupt. They're rich and they're manipulative, especially women. They're rich and they're kind of, you know, ambitious and frightening and you know, unlikely to do you to harm. There's lots and lots of misogyny around the idea of rich women. But also, yes, I think that we have this idea that somehow it's not a nice subject and not a nice thing. And I think you've put it so well, Charlotte. It's a great thing if you're using it well. And it's wonderful to be able to buy your kid a holiday. We're given some very, very negative images about women. We're in relationship to money, particularly. Alice, there's a question here for you. There's from Emma Abbey, which is asking, like, how did you gain confidence, you know, that actually you could ask for the right amount of money? In other words, your worth in relationship to it. She says that she's heading into the freelance sector after she's been full-time employed, and she's kind of negotiating her rates down all the time again, because she wants to like please people and she wants to make sure she gets the job. I mean, you know, how much did you have to work at saying to your agent, I'm not taking it unless they pay me more? You know, how did you build a sense of worth that just because somebody gave you a job didn't mean you ought to just be grateful and accept it?
Well, I think fairness is the answer to most things in life. No one wants to be greedy, and no one wants to be taken for a ride and made a fool of and paid, you know, as women. I mean, the whole thing of, you know, getting paid equal amounts to men and all that, I think is absolutely right. And it's great that that's happening more and more. But I think it's fairness, so that you rely on your agent, my agent, who knows the score. They kind of know what's a fair amount to be paid, and obviously they'll perhaps push for a little more if they think perhaps the company employing you aren't being fair. But you know, it's fair pay for a fair day's work. No one wants to be made a fool of. And I think if you're sensible and you know, you approach it in a sensible way, then it will happen. But of course, there are always employers who will say, you know, well, let's try and get her for a bit less, you know, because they want to make a profit. But it's got to be an equal balance all the time.
And are you able to summon up your sense of not just this is justice, but also I'm worth this? You know, because I think that's what some of the things that women find hard. They find it hard to kind of go, I deserve it. I'm entitled to it and I want it.
Yeah, I mean, they want you for a specific reason, because perhaps, you know, you've done this or you've done this in your life or whatever, and they know you can give this, then yes, you've got to go for it. But again, it's you don't want to be greedy in life. It's people who are greedy that really upset me, that you know, think I want this, I want that. No, I want to do my job and I want to be paid a fair amount in balance with everyone else who's in the production or the show or whatever. That's to me all I want.
Yeah, and I think, Emma, I mean, this issue of standing up for what you're worth, I understand this completely. That when people often say, "Oh, I don't like to ask for my own pay," or a lot of women kind of go, "I'm so glad I've got this job," and then you say, "Can you talk to us about money?" And say, "Well, don't worry about money at the moment." I've heard so many women say, "Don't worry about money at the moment. We'll sort that out later," because they're nervous about saying, "By the way, I will cost this much." But you are saying basically you don't want to lose momentum. In my experience, when I've said, actually, I want to ask for more than that, it'll be £200 more, or it'll be this much more, usually people go, okay. So I wouldn't, you've got to have a go. If you're doing
they've usually offered a bit lower in the first place.
Exactly.
And you've always got a bit,
So be braver. I mean, that's what I would say. Be braver. Charlotte, a question about women's financial literacy, still being kind of part of the idea that men look after money, women, I mean, so much money that women have when they're young gets spent on makeup, clothes, stuff that's about like looking good.
Yeah.
And that can be fun, but it's a massive amount of pressure on women to spend their money on ephemeral objects, things that won't last.
Yeah.
As opposed to helping women think that they ought to own things and invest in things and have, a kind of a long-standing responsibility to money in the world. And do you think that's part of just like what they call patriarchy, the system of men being in charge? Do women need to challenge that much more?
I think it's it's not just the patriarchy. I think it's been directed at both sexes now. It's how can we undermine these people, and how do we make people feel vulnerable and self-conscious, and just undermine them in order to make them part with the cash. It's sort of like it's become a universal advertising cartel, of which is constantly making people not feel good enough. So I think that there's a great quote of somebody's that I can't remember where I saw it, maybe on a tube station poster somewhere in London, which said something like, just to be comfortable in your skin nowadays, and be able to resist all of that image pressure is an act of defiance in itself. And so I see it as sort of that's activism, to go, I'm not going to spend money on makeup. I'm not going to, buy any designer clothes. I'm going to go to charity shops and, and if I want to put my face on for a nice dinner or for a party or something that I want to do that for because it's playful and it's fun, then marvelous. But I'm not going to. Yeah, I think, and I think that interestingly, women have huge amounts of economic power. Like for a lot of the time nowadays, it is women who run the household finances. It is, that beauty industry and clothes and all of that is a massive industry. So women actually have a huge amount of spending power, and so I think we just need to turn off the advertising, or at least understand what the advertising is doing to us, and that it's fictitious. It's just stoking our insecurities in order for people to get wealthier. And the majority of the time, it's for men to get wealthier. So I think, However, saying that, my daughter is absolutely, getting all the makeup and doing all the bits and bobs. And there's something in that which is a bit like, I think there is something quite animalistic and quite natural in that as well. When you think about us in our tribal hunter-gatherer ways, and we would, adorn ourselves, and men and women, with feathers and different things that made us look prettier and more attractive. So I do think there's this sort of magpie element to it as well, that's quite natural and playful. But I think certainly when we get past a certain age, not that I should ever define it as a certain age, but it's a time to go, I don't need that anymore. Actually, that doesn't serve me.
Well, I think that there's several things, isn't there? Which is, first of all, Mary Portas, the great, woman of the high street, says that women's financial potential is unbelievable. They have, as you say, Charlotte, they have huge consumer spending power. Most adverts are targeted at women. We spend a fortune on clothes, on food, on the family, etc., etc. And it's up to us to understand that actually, if we want products to be different, if we want them to be cheaper, if we want less packaging, if we want to, we could make so much change happen. And I think this lockdown has proved to women that so much responsibility has been shoved back on us, childcare, domestic responsibility, care generally. And not only have we not got time to dress up on our Zooms, there's a certain amount of giving away. Well, does it matter? Okay, well, I did this test this morning. It's just lucky I'm not in my onesie, actually. But the reality is we don't need to have as much show. Yes, it can be fun, but we don't need to define ourselves by how we look all the time. I just wanted to say, yeah.
Sorry, I just said there's just too much to do.
Exactly. But I wanted to say as well that yesterday was Equal Pay Day. And for those people listening, let me explain. Women's equality in terms of pay is so different that now from the whole of December, women are effectively working for nothing, because for every man that's earning 12 months of the year, a woman is only earning 11 months of the year on average. So for the whole of December, women are, on average, are working for nothing because we're paid so much less compared to men. And we have to keep, it has to matter. We have to keep caring about this. Finally, just as we're coming to the end, what's your most memorable money moment? What's the thing you remember most about a money moment in your life? I mean, Shobna, you've talked about being in your car. Listen, what have you got one?
No, it's just I just wanted to reflect on how things have changed in the money world. When I was 17, I wanted to go to drama school, but I was too young, and my dad said, "Look, why don't you, do a bit of shorthand and typing and work in an office and do that until you're ready to go," which I did. And I worked in a probation office. So it was a very regular job, and I was getting low salary, but regular salary every month into my bank account. And I went to my bank this particular day, and I said I wanted to withdraw £1. Now, this is in 1963. I wanted to withdraw £1. I didn't have any money. The money, my wages were due to go into the bank 2 days later. And the chap behind the counter looked at, and he said, "Sorry," he said, "I can't do that. You haven't got any money in your bank." And I said, "I know, but I get a regular salary every month, and it will be in there day after tomorrow." And he went, "Yeah, well, what I'm saying, my dear, is that you haven't got any money in there, so I can't give you any money." And I had to walk out without that money. Now, that is how things have changed from then. Now, they'll give you anything, overdrafts, money, take it, get it, because they can add on, obviously, 7% to get it back. But it was just complete madness. And when you think how over the years it's changed to the point when students now are leaving university with thousands and thousands of pounds worth of debt, and they can get overdrafts at the click of a finger. From then, when if you didn't have the money in the bank, you couldn't get any out. And I just find that fascinating.
It is. And it's a kind of a new kind of madness, isn't it? We did a poll, by the way, in this session. How do you manage your money? 13% live on credit cards. 84% live within their means. Well done. What a frugal lot we are, all listening in. And then 3% say, "I don't manage it at all. Somebody else manages it for me." A money memory, Shobna?
Yes, not. I suppose it's not living and not earning to eat, and being able to eat now and have a roof over my head. There you go. There's my money moment. I'm really lucky now to have managed it well for myself and my son. I do still fear not having it, but I don't fear it as much now. because I've made some more sensible choices along the way.
And Charlotte?
Probably for me, it's when I got a scholarship to a prep school as a girl chorister, and I was constantly bullied by this group of boys for being poor. I had, Tesco Blue Stripe crisps, and my mother used to drive me up in this banged out old Fiesta that I used to have to climb out of the boot to open. It was terrible. Everyone was there in their Range Rovers and their Walkers crisps. And so I got bullied quite badly for the 2 years that I was there. And just before I left, I just signed with Sony, and it was £100,000 record deal for 5 albums. And I got to say to this one bully, James, this one boy, that I had, I wasn't. I think I said something to him like, at least I'm not living on Daddy's money. Which gave me a lot of joy at the time.
Good for you.
Good for you. I mean, so this has been such a rich session. Rich in another sense of the word. It's been fantastic to hear all your stories, and it's such a kind of variety of experiences that we can all realize that, whatever people look like on the outside as a package, actually there's a whole other story going on behind. So thanks very much, you three. It's been really brilliant to talk about money. And that's what Smart Pies is trying to get us to do. It's not frightening to talk about money. It's not shaming to talk about money. And where you are with money at one stage in your life might be completely different in another stage of your life. It's part of living. We're going to take a break for 10 minutes while you all go to the toilet, have a cup of tea, ring your mum, or sort out the children you've locked in the bathroom, whatever it is that you need to do. Can I just say, joining Smart Purse, we'd like you to. We want you to be part of our community. We want to make change happen for ourselves and each other and other girls and women. And we're giving free membership to women surviving abuse and surviving economic abuse. Every time you sign up, we give a free membership. Here's the advert for that. So please help us do this by becoming part of the Smart Purse community. And we'll see you back in 10 minutes for the next session. And it was great being with everybody.